What today is a model that goes unnoticed very easily, at the end of the 80s was the greatest exponent of American muscle, being even faster than a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. The Grand National ended its short life with a very exclusive model, and so radical that it put both its national and international competitors to shame. The Buick GNX was a sports car produced jointly by Buick and McLaren to celebrate one of the brand's most successful cars of the 1980s. But unlike Ford, Chevrolet, and Dodge, this company is not exactly known for making sporty models. American muscle fans are well aware of the rivalry between these American brands in the sports sector, but Buick is not usually talked about. And in fact, back in the early 80s, this firm focused on making cars for another type of audience, people already well into adulthood, who were looking for a big car with a luxurious interior and a good dose of chrome. How they managed to build a sports car capable of surpassing models such as the Countach is quite interesting. Between 1950 and 1970, NASCAR had a competition called the Grand National Series. By 1971, the competition was renamed the Winston Cup. It was in the years of 1981 and 1982 that the championship was won by a Buick Regal prepared by the same brand, thanks to Darrell Waltrip. The company wasted no time, and to take advantage of the publicity it was gaining, decided to manufacture a sporty version of the Regal, which eventually received the name Grand National, a name they were able to use because NASCAR had sold the rights to the name about 10 years ago. Buick was not only moving away from their habits making this sporty version of the Regal, but they took the bet a step further. At that time, the American public was very accustomed to cars with V8 engines. The firm instead opted to use a turbocharged V6. The V6 that was finally fitted in these cars had been under development for almost 10 years. It was in 1973 that Ken Baker, a young engineer working for Buick's laboratory, started a Boy Scout program in the engineering department. Ken's intention was to turbocharge the newly revived 3.8-liter V6 and thus be able to improve both performance in lighter cars and fuel economy in heavier cars. Ken said that in the beginning, he borrowed and scavenged parts to assemble the first test engine, staying after hours to avoid problems with his management. 2 years into the project, almost in secret from his bosses, he was called by the new head of engineering, Lloyd Roos, to his office. And to Ken's surprise, instead of ending up being fired, he was interested in a secret project. Within 2 weeks, Baker was leading a team focused on putting this new improved engine into production. Lloyd came up with the idea that the best way to test this new V6 turbo was to build a pace car for the Indianapolis 500 race. So by 1976, they were able to build a safety car with a V6 that had better performance than several of the V8 cars competing in the race, something that was unthinkable for the usual fans. Lloyd Roos sought to change the company's image from cars for an adult audience to something more passionate and modern. Taking advantage then of the Regal's championships in the early 80s and this new engine, the firm took it upon itself to improve the Regal and increase its power in order to sell it as the first Grand National. In the first instance, it was just an optional package of the Regal that offered the model with the body stripped of both chrome, alloy wheels, and dark paint tones, thus moving away from the more classic Buick models. Separately was given the option to equip the V6 turbo. It was an aesthetically questionable car with an interior not very pleasing to the eye. The brand's regular customers did not like it much at first, since they were used to the big V8 with low power and high torque. But with the performance it presented, they gradually changed their minds until in the end, there were many buyers interested in this car with this new technology. And not only that, but Lloyd's goal was being fulfilled, and the brand now had new customers who, instead of opting for other brands such as Ford or Chevrolet, now sought to own a Buick. When the V6 debuted in that 76 pace car, it produced 165 horsepower. That figure increased to 200 with the V6 that was offered to the public. The Grand Nationals that did have the turbocharged V6 began to fall within thousandths of the Corvette's acceleration and quarter-mile times, even beating the Camaro's times. It was in 1984 when this V6 became standard on all Grand Nationals. In this same year, the variety of colors were no longer available to be sold only in black. In addition, it received for the first time an intercooler and electronic fuel injection, and could be easily modified, extracting even more power from its reinforced engine. In this way, the brand got a car with an aggressive character and ready to compete with any other firm. Its reputation was gaining more and more weight, and in 1986 came an important mechanical update. Its power now reached 235 horsepower, and its torque increased from 400 to almost 450 Newton meters. By the next year, its power would increase once again to 245 horsepower, and its torque to 480 Newton meters. It's even said that these figures were altered by the brand and were actually higher. It turns out that Buick was one of the General Motors firms, a company that owned several other automotive brands, including Chevrolet. With the market that was beginning to leave aside both the Camaro and the Corvette, General Motors could not allow the fame of these models to suffer even more. And sales of this new model were taking off, going from 5,000 in '86 to 20,000 the next year. That is why it's said that the figures given for the Grand National were altered so that they were not much higher than those declared by Chevrolet for the Corvette. This ended up being known because in 1986, a very important car magazine in the country, Car and Driver, tested one of these cars, and its technical team discovered that the Grand National was producing about 290 horsepower. In addition, the same team measured 4.9 seconds for the model's 0 to 60 miles per hour, and 13.9 seconds for its quarter mile. At that time, with these figures, this sports car already surpassed the contemporary Corvette, the Ferrari sold in the United States, including the 288 GTO, and even the Lamborghini Countach. And although at first it seems illogical, General Motors decided to kill the Grand National in favor of the already known and loved Chevrolet models. That's why it gave the order for the Regal to use a new platform that would transform it into a front-wheel drive car and focus again on its target audience. However, Buick wanted to say goodbye to the Grand National as it deserved, and announced the launch of what would become the fastest American model ever created until then, the Buick GNX. One last special version, whose number of units was limited to just 547, being its acronym, Grand National Experimental. The firm then partnered with McLaren to manufacture this new extreme model. Aesthetically, it was equipped with larger 16-inch wheels, and the little chrome that remained on the grille disappeared to adopt a black color. The same V6 turbo that equipped in previous years was modified to take its capacity to another level. A new intercooler and exhaust were installed. The intake and headers were improved. The turbo was modified. A reinforced automatic transmission was fitted. The differential was improved and the suspension was modified to make it stiffer. Finally, the declared figures were 276 horsepower and 488 Newton meters of torque. Car and Driver tested the car again, and this time, the figures were 4.7 seconds for the 0 to 6 miles per hour, or 0 to 96 kilometers per hour, while the quarter mile was completed in 13.5 seconds, and finished with the speed of 164 kilometers per hour, or 102 miles per hour. The selling price of these cars ended up being $29,290, a sum that may seem low, but adjusted for inflation over the last 30 years, it amounts to more than $78,000. In addition, dealerships sold these exclusive cars at $10,000 or $20,000 above that first $29,000. There were even records of a GNX selling for $75,000, what today would be about $200,000. Thus, the black sheep of General Motors ended its short life with great style, being one of the most radical cars you could see on the streets of the North American country in the late 80s. Today, it has an average selling price of $165,000, and there are units that were sold for more than $300,000.